that I didn't know.
Yeah. But what scene in this one are you most proud of that you like?
Oh man, the scene with Tom Atkins telling Jason Lively the story in his apartment. I mean, I will go to my grave happy with that scene. And the other one that struck me watching the few moments of the film that I could watch tonight was the scene between Chris and JC in the dorm room.
Right.
Because it's a scene that I don't see in movies ever. Just two friends just giving each other shit and going, listen, I care about you and what are you doing? And it not only is it a scene I don't see in movies, I'm not sure people do it enough in the world.
It's not forwarding the plot. It's just
It's a character scene.
bullshitting. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, the reason I always love this is because it just felt like it's a greatest hits package of like every late night creature feature, zombie, alien,
Absolutely.
whatever.
Yeah.
And then like Monster Squad is the more, the classic Universal stuff. But this one, it just feels like you just threw everything against the wall and hoped that it stuck. And that's and most of it does. So, but just tell me, like, why did you think that would work? Because and yet no one had really tried it before.
Well, again, the naivete of youth, you don't know what you can't do. And I loved all those movies that you see referenced here. And I just, as you say, dropped them all in a blender and hit puree and hoped that it would work. But watching it, at least the last couple minutes that I just watched, tone, I don't know how many of you guys are filmmakers or hope to be filmmakers. Tone is something that I think is almost, it's not missing from movies now, but it's something, it's a lost art, which is figuring out what is the tone of this movie. And watching this tonight was very strange for me because I realized that the tone was completely from my heart and not from my head. And I realized, you think of a movie like this or Monster Squad or American Werewolf or Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, it's a comedy horror movie. The blend that jumped out at me tonight was it's a blend between a kind of a Warner Brothers cartoon and a really kind of emotional story. I don't know if it's the pace or if it's, by the way, Barry Dvorak's score, when we mixed this movie, I was like, Barry, I loved The Warriors, and there's a lot of stuff he did that I loved, but I just didn't feel like it landed. This score is really good. It's really good. It's the glue that holds it together, which is what a good film score should be, and I didn't appreciate it for years and years and years. What was I talking about? Tone. It's a Warner Brothers cartoon, and then this kind of emotional, it really lands emotionally, and I think, movies have become very, I think, surfacey. Like the cheap joke. Like back in the day, the good news is that Your Dates Are Here always gets a laugh, because it's a cheap joke. But there's other things in this movie that sort of resonate, and you go, wow, they're friends, and wow, that detective is really haunted. It's stuff from a better movie that's in this movie. But I'm dead serious, it makes the movie hold up a little better than I expected it to, because I didn't plan that, I just felt it. I said, this poor guy, how many Night of the Creeps nerds are here? Real nerds. Cameron goes nuts at the end. Detective Cameron goes nuts. He's about to commit suicide. The kid comes to him and says, hey, there's my friend's dead. There's zombies. And he's like, fuck it, okay. And he gets his shotgun. And all of those wisecracks that in another type of movie, I almost said a lesser movie. This is not a great movie. But in a movie that's just there to entertain you, you do cheap jokes. All of his jokes are, he's just nuts. He doesn't give a shit anymore. And I find that quite moving. Watching the movie now, it's like, oh, that was a good decision. And I have to say, the best thing about this movie is Tom Atkins.
Absolutely.
Without question.
The best thing about most movies with Tom Atkins in it are Tom Atkins. So, but
Halloween 3 has some good stuff. And hey, by the way, John Carpenter fans here?
Yeah.
You'll notice that Tom's partner, Detective Landis, is Wally Taylor, who, if you watch carefully, is behind him in the control room in Escape from New York. Just for the Carpenter fans.
Where did you get the idea for the the parasites and how, because I watched all the making ofs on the DVD, and you don't quite explain how you got them to move the way they do. And I'm especially curious about that giant pile of them at the end that is the grossest damn thing I've ever seen.
Well, mostly they were little radio-controlled cars. I'm dead serious. With rubber. I mean, we built armatures, and they're little remote-control cars, but they wiggle. But the basement is a stop-motion sequence. Ted Ray. I was always a huge fan of Ray Harryhausen and all the guys that followed him, Jim Danforth and Randy Cook and Phil Tippett. And I feel that, at least I did back then. I've looked at a lot of that stuff now, and it doesn't really hold up because of CGI has made so many huge, strides forward. But I wanted to do. I said that's the only way to show all of the creeps is to do it in stop motion. So that was a miniature set, and frame by frame stop motion animation.
Nice. It looks great. I think it looks great. But where did was the?
Where did I get the idea for the squiggles?
Size and shape seems practical in that you need something that can go into somebody's mouth and somebody's head. Like you need something smallish.
Well, what's funny is the movie's called Night of the Creeps, but the actual creeps, and I always originally thought of it as just the notion of getting the creeps. Like this is my horror movie. I'm getting the creeps, but actually them as those little squiggles, those slugs from space. That is the thing that I spent the least amount of time thinking about when I wrote this movie.
Wow. There you go. Let me see. What you guys have any? There were some nerds out here. Let's get some questions. All right. Yes, in the front.
I just had a comment. I just wanted to say, like, I'm a nerd. I'm a film nerd, and I love horror movies. But like, I've heard of this film. Sadly, this is my first time seeing the movie, but I'm also glad it's my first time because I got to see it with an audience, and I loved it. Like, just like 15 minutes in, I was like, I already love this movie. Like, I don't know what to expect, but I already love this movie.
Thank you. He says he likes the movie.
I'm going to assume all of you like the movie. So,
Well, I have a quibble. At the end of the movie, Chris says, "Detective, thrill me." He's just talking to himself. When did he hear Detective Cameron say that line before? It's like in Monster Squad. Why is Frankenstein being sucked into the vortex? He's a good guy. I don't.
all right,
This is the hallmark of my films, are plot holes.
I saw the film when it first hit VHS through HBO video, and I was always curious.
1915.
Why? Could you give a little insight? I don't think it ever opened theatrically in Philadelphia, where I'm from, and so for me it was a VHS discovery. And I think for a lot of the generation, that was like part of the beauty of the film is that it was a discovery. It was like a hidden treasure. And can you talk about the theatrical release and maybe how you feel that now that it's become a cult favorite?
At some point, I pissed off the studio executive because I showed. First of all, how many here was this ending new to you? Anybody? Has everybody seen this ending? Because this is not the theatrical ending. This is what we call the director's cut. Because this was the ending that I scripted. I thought, how cool would it be if at the end of the film, creeps go into the cemetery and presumably are going to raise hundreds of dead, and then this big searchlight comes on, and there's the spaceship from the beginning of the movie. That felt very poetic and kind of had thematic circularity to me. But when I showed it to the studio, they hated it because the effect wasn't finished. They said, there's light stands in that shot. I said, well, we haven't finished the effect. How come you can see a guy over there holding up? I said, because the effect's not finished, but use your imagination. And they couldn't. They said, you know what? We need a cheap scare. We need that Carrie, Friday the 13th. Back in the 80s, folks, every horror movie had to have a cheap scare at the end. And so the theatrical version of this movie has a cheap scare where the zombie dog comes up to Cynthia and shoots a creep out at her, which to me defeats the whole movie. It's like, why did they just spend 90 minutes trying to defeat these things when at the end they lose? Hated it. So I wrote a very terse note to the head of the studio. And the theatrical release was not what I had hoped it would be, and I suspect there was a connection.
It was sort of a regional release, right? Wasn't that kind of the...
Yeah, but it's huge in Germany. Huge.
Anyone else? Wait, I just can't see into the back there. Okay, I'll go here, but then, okay, yeah, you first.
So, I love the fact how there's the Go Monster Squad scene in the bathroom. You can see that little sneak peek there.
Go Monster Squad, yeah.
Monster Squad. So was the scientist calling Rudy from the Monster Squad? Because it's Rudy that he says to get the.
Oh.
Right? Is that Rudy? Or am I just...
Well, but that would have happened a year earlier, and Rudy is 12. Rudy, 12-year-old boy that I happen to know. No, I know. No, what he's referring to is that there's graffiti in the bathroom when JC dies. It says, "Go Monster Squad." That was because I had made the deal to make Monster Squad while I was still finishing this movie. So it was a little bit of a Marvel post-credits link, yeah. I was hot for 5 minutes, and that's the kind of stuff you can do.
Okay. Was Tom Atkins your first choice, and if not, what other actors were you considering for the detective?
That's a great question. I love that question. Because I wrote the guy and didn't have any actor in mind. And I thought of Hal Holbrook because I loved him from Capricorn 1. And Clu Gulager came in. And Clu was great. He's a wonderful actor, and we all love him. But it's this thing when you write a part and the actor's job is to come in and bring life to it. So Atkins comes in, and I loved Escape from New York. I loved Halloween 3. I loved a lot of this, The Fog. I loved the stuff he did, but I didn't think of him as the horror icon. Let's get horror icon Tom Atkins. I just wanted a good actor, and he came in, and he read the part. And Eileen Starger and I, the casting director, sat there, and we, "Thank you, Tom, very much." And he left, and I went, "That's the guy." Because he read the lines, and I went, I didn't see somebody in my head, to answer your question, until he read the lines, and I said, "That's the guy I saw in my head." So he was a blessing.
All right, what else we got here? Back there? Okay, yeah, if you can see back that far. I can see right there.
How many of his Tom Atkins lines were actually ad-libbed, or did you literally write all those lines and he just shot them out there that great?
Wrote them all. And one of them doesn't even make sense, which is Miller Time. However, I don't know if you noticed the frat boy with the mustache. That's David Miller, who created the makeup for Freddy Krueger and created the makeup effects for this movie. And also, if you guys are effects nerds, KNB, okay, Kurtzman and Howard Berger are in the movie. Because at the time we made it, we said, okay, we got all of these young 20-something effects guys who are geniuses. Now, do we cast a bunch of frat boys and put makeup effects on them? Or do we just use the guys who were doing the makeup effects? So we saved money that way too.
I had assumed it's Miller Time was referring to Dick Miller.
It referred actually to David Miller because it's a David Miller effect. But yeah, no, Miller Time is when you're done, and he wasn't halfway done. He was still killing him. But it doesn't matter because it's Atkins. You can get away with anything. Over here.
There's a very deliberate, blue and magenta color palette that you use in a lot of the scenes. Was there a reason for that, or did you just think it looked cool?
I think it looked cool.
All right.
Similar question. Towards the end there was a shot of the house on fire in the background and a really nice flower in the foreground. Was there a reason for that, or was it just...
If you watched the movie, you would have seen Detective Cameron smell that flower as he was walking up the front walk of the sorority when he first arrived. I had to explain that to my wife too. She was like, "Why is there a shot of a flower?" Because never mind.
Right there.
Can you tell us if you wrote a part for Tom Atkins in Predator?
I believe it's The Predator. Let's get it right.
No. But I am writing a part for him in the other script I'm writing that I hope to be the next film I direct.
I've always heard you, when people ask you if you'd ever do a sequel, you always say you would only do it if Tom Atkins was in it, which would be impossible almost impossible since you can't, but you also...
Or would it?
Or let's say, it's science fiction, you can bring back whoever you want, so...
No, I was really hot on doing a Creep sequel about 4 or 5 years ago. But I got other fish to fry right now.
Well, let's talk about the, because when did you realize, 'cause, and I think Scott alluded to it before, that when did you realize that it had this following, that it caught on again, and that you had this sort of weird underground fan base? This and Monster Squad both had this sort of rumblings, and I mean, they were, a lot of that was tied to the screenings you did at the Draft House down in Austin, but that was sort of the result of people just wanting to see it on a big screen again.
Yeah. I think our romance with cinema, those of us who love movies, our romance with cinema is, like any romance, very personal. And I think that you find that some of the movies that you fall in love with, you happen to be sitting in a theater with, 300 people or however many. But a lot of them are late at night when maybe you had a bad day and you discovered. I love what you said about, discovering it on VHS. And I think that that's sometimes very impactful because it surprises you. And that's what happened, I think, with this movie. I don't know if it had been marketed better or released in more theaters, if it would have done any better. It's a peculiar movie. It just is. And, it takes some, you have to sort of taste it and go, well, I don't know if I like the taste of this. And, well, maybe I do. And then you see it again and you see it again. And that's what we have with, cable and Netflix now, and when you can just take your time and go, do I like this? And so in a way, it's actually quite heartening for me that the people who like the movie really like it, as opposed to a lot of movies that come out and people go, that was awesome, and then they forget about it 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
Of course, I would have made a lot more movies if this had been successful.
We got time for a couple more. Okay, it's just hard to see, but yeah, go ahead. Whoever you're
That
pointing
guy.
to. That guy.
Okay. During the start of this whole project, the conceptualization, sorry, I was in my speech here, was there any intent to make the zombies more flesh-eating themed at any point, other than the slug theme?
No. No, look, can I get on a soapbox? Can I get on an invisible soapbox? The notion of the zombie apocalypse, the flesh-eating zombies, who then pass on that disease, was invented by George A. Romero. The Walking Dead is a ripoff. Shaun of the Dead is a ripoff. Zombieland is a ripoff. Anything that doesn't have his name on it is a ripoff of what he did due to some ridiculous copyright thing. Thank you, please. But here's now I have to eat crow. I actually ripped him off too. But it wasn't about eating flesh. It was about transferring the space slug, and that was actually stolen from Alien. The movie's a total ripoff. But I ripped off everything, so you can't knock me. Including Animal House, by the way. Huge John Landis influence on this movie.
There's a character named Landis, right? Okay, yeah. All right. Who's got a good last one? Okay, there.
So did James Gunn get a hold of you at all when he made Slither? I mean, we're talking.
James and I have talked about it, and I consider him a friend, although we've only spent moments together. Yeah, we talked about that. Did you know there was a TV show in the 70s called The Monster Squad?
Yeah.
I didn't. And I wrote a movie with the same title, and nobody knew. So when James says he didn't see the movie, I believe him. So we put that to rest.
I hope you guys can all come out Saturday for the big Monster Squad screening. Fred, thank you so much for sticking around and talking to us. We'll do it again on Saturday.
So you're